Photographers have been using the power of light and shadow in street photography for years to create contrast, intrigue, and captivating compositions. So how can you use light and shadow to make incredible street photographs? Well, in this video, I'm going to talk you through 4 of the best tips for light and shadow in street photography that you can use to create compelling street photographs like these. The first tip is to use harsh light and shadow to frame a subject or subjects in your photograph. So when you're lucky enough to have a beautiful sunny day, which unfortunately we don't get that many of here in England, but you know, they do happen on occasion, you've got to take advantage of it and get out there and take street photographs. So when you have got some harsh light bouncing around, you know, you can find some splashes of light interspersed with shadow. Then really all you need to do is wait for people to interact with the scene or for someone to kind of fit inside that light. So you can essentially use that block of light or block of shadow or multiple shadows, multiple light, depending on what kind of scene you found, to then frame up a subject. I've talked about subframing before on this channel, and it's a really powerful tool to show exactly where the viewer needs to be looking in the image and just to really make for an interesting composition. So when you do find shafts of light in interesting shapes maybe, you just want to spend a bit of time to find the right composition to include the right subject or multiple subjects to then make for a compelling photograph. The next tip is to use light and shadow to create contrast in your photo. Humans, when they look at a photograph, will notice first generally, or be most attracted to the part of the photo that has the most amount of contrast. So a good way to introduce contrast into your photograph to make a focal point or an interesting part of the image is to use light and shadow. So again, when you've got a block of light or some interesting shadow going on, you might want to think about how you can use that shadow and that light to your advantage to create some contrast. So you want to put a darker image in front of the lighter background or a lighter image in front of a darker background, depending on what effect you're going for. But using contrast can be a great way to create a nice, compelling, interesting photograph with a lot of impact, a lot of punch, because again, when someone's looking at your photograph, they're going to be noticing that contrast. They're going to be picking up that difference between light and shadow, and it might then make them want to look at the image more. It might make the image stand out a little bit more from the rest. You know, if someone's scrolling on their social media or they're looking through a bunch of street photographs, then something with a lot of contrast can be very attractive. It can be hard to do well though, and there's a lot of photographs out there at the moment, you know, using light and shadow to create contrast. Definitely one of the biggest or well-known street photographers to use this a lot in their work was Fan Ho. If you're not familiar with Fan Ho, then you know, have a look online, check out his work. Incredible street photographer. So again, it can be hard to be original, but I think that's a subject probably for a whole other video. This is just, I guess, the technique that you might want to be looking out for to create a compelling image with light and shadow, and that is to focus on contrast. The third tip is to incorporate silhouettes in your street photography using that light and shadow that you've found. Again, all these tips obviously are generally only going to be pertinent on a nice sunny day when there is lots of harsh light, lots of bright light bouncing around and some nice shadows off of the back of that light. So when you do have the right conditions, incorporating silhouettes into your street photography can make for really interesting elements and just take your picture to the next level. So how do you capture a silhouette using light and shadow? Well, it's quite simple, but it takes a little bit of time to practice to get good at taking silhouettes in street photographs. But essentially all you need is a bright background, so maybe a wall that has sunlight on it, an interesting space, but directly in front of that light space is some shadow. And the shadow that rises high enough so that when people walk through the scene or other elements are in the scene, they are then in shadow, which creates a contrast between the background and the object that's in shadow. So here in this photo, I knew I wanted to have the light in the background and the shadow in the foreground to hopefully capture a silhouette. It was just a case of waiting for people to walk past and capture the right subject at the right time. Then in post-production, I bring down the shadow slightly to make it so you can't really see much detail on the figure, just makes it a bit more impactful. But you want to be kind of careful when you're editing these kind of shots. Like if you crush the shadows too much, then it can look a bit artificial and it doesn't look like you might see it with the naked eye. So I tend to try and edit my photographs with a soft touch. But again, that's a whole different kettle of fish and a whole different topic for another video. Maybe let me know in the comments if that's a video you'd like to see on the channel, where I maybe talk through how I go about editing and the things that I like to incorporate when I do edit my photographs. Once you've got the hang of taking photographs using silhouettes, then you want to start seeing how you can elevate those images, because there's a lot of, I guess, silhouette street photography out there. I suppose these days, like any kind of subgenre of street photography, there's a lot of work out there. So you just want to start thinking about how you might want to elevate your own work to make it stand out a little bit. That could be the texture in the background. The more interesting the background, the more interesting the photo. It could be the amount of people that you have silhouetted in your shot. The more silhouettes you have, maybe the more interesting it is. It could be pops of color. It could be other little elements and things and other techniques that you might want to incorporate, as well as using silhouettes. But yeah, the technique is very powerful and it's a great thing to incorporate in your light and shadow street photography. And the last tip is to use light and shadow to create mystery and intrigue in your street photography. Using shadow on a bright sunny day can be a great way to mask certain parts of an image. When you mask certain parts of an image, it makes the viewer wonder what's important about the bit that's been masked. It creates more intrigue, it creates a bit of mystery, it makes the viewer want to work out what's going on. I really try to incorporate mystery and intrigue in my photos as much as possible. I think it does make for really successful street photos when you don't give everything on a plate and you hold a little bit back, and this can be used to create really story-driven, interesting street photos. To build on the things we've touched on in this video and to create more mystery and curiosity in your street photography, then check out this video here.